All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Breaking Muscle podcast. Today, I am joined by Joe Bennett, aka the Hypertrophy Coach. Joe, even you came Jay briefly there.
Yeah, that's all right.
Joe, thank you for taking the time to have a chat. How's things?
Good. Yeah, no complaints. I mean, just I don't think my daily life is not as glorious as I think maybe some people might have. It revolves 90% around family, and then I fit some muscle building and working out stuff in there in between. But yeah, I'm no complaints. I'm good.
Okay, excellent. Not too dissimilar in many respects. I think it's different for you at the moment, but we're in lockdown here. I'm currently homeschooling kids. I don't know if you've had to deal with that or if that's been a thing over there.
Yeah, we had. I mean, I'm lucky that I really had no idea how any of this would work out ahead of time, and I didn't realize even here like how certain government decisions are pretty much completely up to the states here. So like the individual states. So I had periods of lockdown, had periods of homeschooling, which is a challenge. And but I'm lucky enough right now. Our schools are open, and so my two oldest are at school, and my youngest is still at home. So we've been lucky that I'm in one of the states that actually has a little bit more lax as far as obviously kind of letting people do what they need to do.
So homeschool is a challenge. March the 8th, our kids are due to go back, so fingers crossed for that. Now, I mean, we talked off air briefly about we want to talk about your career path and how you've developed your business and how the perception may well be that essentially, you wake up, you look at your laptop a couple of times, you train yourself, put out a cool video on Instagram, you go to bed, the money rolls in. Obviously, there's a whole lot more to it than that. Even the most naive person knows that, but still, I think probably the reality of what's gone in and what people think is required are probably two very different things. So, would you mind taking a moment, sort of mapping out, your journey through your fitness career and how you've got to this point?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, honestly, it's I joke is depending on what people are hoping to hear. It's probably the worst answer most people want to hear, as far as it's like the least sexy and it's not exactly a quick overnight thing. But so I'll try and keep it relatively brief. I mean, my stuff started, I think, first and foremost, which I think is important. Just with my passion for training, so I kind of fell in love, introduced to like training a little bit through sports, but then really got into it from the bodybuilding world and just went completely OCD into it. I mean, I tell people when I was in, high school, I trained 3 times a day. My extra money went towards gym memberships, from work was from gym memberships and, protein supplements, whatever the hell you're buying back then. And then same thing through university. I was training twice a day. That's when I got my first job in a gym. The first time I started training, I was lucky enough. The university I went to was like one of the earlier on universities to actually have a training program in-house where you could actually get certified and actually start training other students in-house, which is nice because, when you don't really know what you're doing, that's a good population to work with where you're, not going to injure somebody, hopefully. And so anyway, that's I always say that because I really do just have a passion for training. And again, so a lot of people hopefully have that prerequisite to a certain degree. But then obviously a lot of people, I was in a position for a while where I was, hiring, developing trainers. That was almost, I'd say 8-9 years of my career. And lots of times I'd have people come in that would be like their only thing that they'd have though. It's like, I really like working out. I'd be like, you like working out yourself? And they'd be like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, I hope so. Like, how do you feel about other people? Do you actually want to help other people? Do you have a passion for that? Do you have any type of, business sense? Like, what's your game plan? Walk me through your average day. And, so it's amazing to me how many trainers back then I think had no idea of just like, well, I like working out, so hire me. And, but anyway, so I got my first job, like kind of in like a big box gym when I was 22. And I was lucky enough to get around some mentors then. So one of them was my direct boss. One of them was like a VP in the company that I was in, that were really brilliant with like the business of personal training. So really teaching me basically like in a building. And I was lucky enough to work with a company too, where you were responsible for your own, leads and sales and everything, so it's not that it's bad. Obviously there's some places that have a salesperson in place. They kind of feed the trainers. Trainers don't only really have to train, but for most trainers, I think it's at some point in time, I think it's good to start in another company because lots of times people try and start stuff from the ground up. Like I'm going to open a gym, and it's like, people don't realize how like you better be a very proficient trainer before then. You better be proficient with marketing because people don't realize obviously you're not just going to put a sign on the door and people are going to start coming in. So I think I was happy with the way that I started, where at least the gym I was at had people in there already. It already had good traffic. It already had a lot of members. Yeah. And so, a couple years really just learning how to manage and develop, the whole business side of it. And then within like 2 years, I think I became the manager of that club that I was in. And so from that point on, I always trained clients. As I also liked about the company, I trained clients full time, and I also was the manager, responsible for hiring, developing, hitting training goals and things like that. And so I did that. Sometime right around in the middle there, I really I felt like I had a pretty good grasp on the business side of it. And I really started to want to dig in more into continuing education. And I was trying to get a lot of that from the company that I was in, like in-house. And at some point in time, I had like all the smart people. I would just be banging on their door all the time, talking on the phone, be in their clubs, and just wanted to like do stuff. I remember one of my favorite guys that was one of my top mentors then was literally like, I really don't have time to teach you all the time. And I was like, oh, okay. And he's like, why don't you just do some continuing education? And it's very weird because I don't even remember what intro certifications I had at that point in time. I had some NASM stuff and just the stuff to get myself in the door. But I hadn't really considered that there's actual good continuing education out there that requires you to go somewhere and interact with other coaches and learn from people that are doing stuff. And so probably around age 25 is when I first started going to Charles Poliquin certifications. So the person that I actually worked with, again, a VP in the company, knew Charles Poliquin personally, and said, check this guy's stuff out. And even though it's kind of more in the physique development, bodybuilding type world, like I kind of went that route. And obviously he was much more the strength coach side, but obviously there's a ton of crossover. And it was at least the first time where I had the experience of being around, trainers that go, that have to travel somewhere. Cause I realized I'm going to have to travel every single time, take time out of work, the expense of traveling, the expense of the certification. When you're with other people that do the same thing, it's nice because you're around people that obviously their profession is important to them. They're motivated, they're driven, they want to bring great results to their clients. And so that really started, I kind of committed to myself after I had such a good experience from the first certification. I was like, I'm going to do this as a bare minimum. I said once, but I've pretty much since then kept up twice a year where I go somewhere to something, whether it's a full certification or a seminar or whatever. And again, just with rare exception, nothing good is ever close by. So, I'd have to travel, around the States or travel to other countries and stuff like that. And so that was a big thing for me. That's, I think, really got the ball rolling on just making a decision at some point in time to basically plan for because I understand a lot of trainers, like, I can't afford to do that. Because obviously when you're taking, we don't get paid when we go on vacation, right? You go away from your clients and you're losing time. Obviously you're losing time, you're losing that money for that time. And you're also paying for an expense at the same time. So it's almost like double expensive. So I get it, but it's one of those things where I think most trainers just need to commit to something and same as anything else, budget, make it work. I joke that the same trainers that would tell me they couldn't afford to go to a certification, I'd see them spend like $10 a day on like energy drinks. They'd be eating out 1 or 2 times a day and just stupid shit. And I'm like, I don't want to be like your mom, but you don't see how that stuff adds up. I was like, here's a bottle of caffeine pills. I'm not even judging you for caffeine, but this bottle of caffeine pills will save you a shit ton of money off of those damn energy drinks and stuff. So, obviously that's a little bit of a side rant, but unfortunately, same as any profession, some people are just unwilling to actually get out of their comfort zone and make some decisions to keep stuff moving forward. So I say all that time frame because it wasn't until I was, in my club, I had worked with some pretty good bodybuilders, and I always had a passion for that. So even though I did some of the strength side stuff, I started working with amateur bodybuilders and some pretty good bodybuilders in my area, and I got connected with Ben Poliquin. That's when I think at first people started to have a little bit of an idea of who I was, and then basically I decided to come and start working with him. I would move from basically hour and a half away, move my whole family up to before MI40 was started. And so I was basically coming there for months before we started to help open and start the gym. And it was really like a huge risk. It wasn't really like, here's a position to come to. It's like, hey, do you want to be a part of this thing? And even from the beginning, but it wasn't even really a job. It was like, come up here and let's see if we can make it. And so again, that was a huge thing. That was a big point where I had a great job. I had a very comfortable position. I had just had my first son. So I had a 1-year-old at the time. So on paper, not the best, safest decision. I even remember talking to my dad and him being like, "Are you sure about this?" And I'm like, "Not really, but I gotta make a move here. I feel like it's something that's important for me to do." And so I'm trying to think of the time frame. That was probably around 2015 or so ish when I moved up to Tampa. And I give that time frame because I probably didn't go on social media. So even when I was there, I had never done anything on social media. So up to this point, up to 2015. I had some like Facebook account from like when I was in university that I never touched, but I never did social media, anything work related. And I basically everyone I worked with at MI40 was like, you need to do social media. Like you have to do it, And I don't know, I think I just had this weird like stigma at that point in time. It wasn't quite where it is now. Obviously it was much more like, hey, here's a guy, here's my bicep. Look how good it looks. Follow me. Hey, here's my ass. Look how good it looks. Follow me. And so I was like, at some point in time, I was like, well, I had some good influential people that were like, well, just make it your own. Just start doing whatever you want to do. And I remember thinking like, but prior to that, I honestly always enjoyed public speaking. I always enjoyed actually writing. And the things that I actually always did in like every job I was ever at, literally from school all the way up, is like, even when I took public speaking in university and some other things that I always took classes that involved like debating and stuff. And I always enjoyed it. And I always would try and make stuff entertaining. I mean, I guess maybe especially then more than now, hopefully I just like being the center of attention. So I always got off. I was like, well, if I'm going to read something, I'm going to make this a joke in some capacity. And I even did that with like, we had these structured business calls at gyms I used to work at before, where we'd compare and do things like look at what other clubs had done and stuff like that. And I ended up turning it into some sort of like competitive battle with other clubs, where I'd basically get on these calls and I would think funnily talk shit to these other clubs and things like that. I turned this whole thing into something that it wasn't intended to be, but they actually, managers and stuff liked it because it became entertaining. So anyway, I say all that because when I started social media, I remember talking to some people. Literally, my current business partner was the first person that like helped me. Like, I literally had to be like, so what's Instagram? Like, where do I get it? Like, what do I do? Like, what is this whole I don't get it. I don't understand anything. What are hashtags? And so I literally joke. He was like explaining to me like the way you'd have to explain to your grandma how to do social media. And I remember when I first started, I would do posts just the way I wanted to write. I mean, I think you could only do 15 seconds of video or something then. But I would write these long ass things. And I remember him being like, hey man, I'm just gonna give you a heads up. Like, I don't think people like read that on Instagram. Like, it's, people want like quick, they want to look at stuff and move on with their life. And I remember being at the time, like, when I have like 6 followers, however the hell you start, I remember like saying like, well, when I write something, I just ask my wife if she thinks it's funny. I think it's funny. And then I ask her if she thinks it's funny. And then if she thinks it's funny, then it gets a thumbs up. I'm like, I'm going to write what I want to write. And so the reason I say that as well, too, is, I'll hopefully get a little bit of strategy as we go to the call of some people maybe wanting to do their own thing. But I do all that setup because it actually ended up working out in my favor. Where I remember when my stuff was starting to grow in the beginning, people, one, I could speak with a level of expertise because I'd just been doing this for 15 years from that point, or at that point in time, 10 years, from that point. And, I could speak to it like, okay, I understand. Here's how I work with a client. Here's the things I focus on. So the subject matter wasn't difficult. I actually found more people would like the way that I just wrote. So making everything kind of funny, hopefully entertaining, giving some people shit, whatever. And so anyway, that was, I think it's a thing people talk about, but it's I think it's important to have your voice, whatever the hell that means. Like, if you like writing serious, write serious. If you like writing jokes, write jokes. If you like things long, short, don't necessarily think that you have to do something, because ultimately you just want to find people that, trust your expertise, but also they relate to you in some capacity, and that's a huge thing where, people will look at the whole, number of followers and stuff. And like, obviously that's important. You want to help more people, but I also tell people too, like, that just shows how good you are at Instagram. It doesn't mean how good you are at a coach. So if I have somebody I look at that has less followers than me, they could technically have a better business. They could have more followers that are into actually buying their product or trust their expertise. And at the same time, I could look at somebody that has 10 million followers and I don't think, oh, well, that person's better, coach than me. Like, no, they're just better at Instagram. Mm-hmm. So if you speak to a level of expertise and you, are honestly, again, it sounds cliche, I hate to say it, but if you're just true to obviously what's your own voice and how you speak and how you are in real life and how you actually interact with clients, you're going to find people that relate to you. And I think that's really all people need to do. So I say all that because I think the things that I've had any level of success, where I think people get confused about, oh, I want to be an online this or I want to be an online that. I mean, the reality is if you're struggling with content or people like, what do I do? What do I post? Lots of times it's people that aren't trainers, right? Like, you're not even a trainer. Like, it's like, it'd be like, for me, it'd be like, oh, I want to be like a popular, medical doctor on Instagram, but I'm going to skip med school and treating patients. You can read all the books, but even if you could read all the books that a medical doctor does, if you're not actually interacting with people, if you're not actually, prescribing and diagnosing things, that's 99% of it. Like, that's the people have heard me talk about. I don't get too attached to tools. It's all about your delivery, and it's all about, the actual space between you and the person you're attempting to help. And so lots of times I say that my whole least sexy thing there is if I think that it's something worked out well for me when I started social media and things seemed to just kind of go pretty well as soon as I started, is because I never had any issues with content. It's like, just literally like, well, what do you do with clients all day? Like, what do you do during a session? What do you do outside of a session? What do you do around sessions? And just like you could start bullet pointing things, where it's like obviously things with adherence or form or effort or whatever. And all of those should just open a can of worms of like, well, these are things I can easily talk about. And if it helps people produce results or provides value in any capacity, then just keep doing it. So I think that's one of the biggest things I still see with people that struggle to do the online thing. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being purely having an online business. But I think it's a really hard thing to do if you haven't done the in-person thing first, especially if you're going to go the training route. If you're more just focusing on nutrition, you're more just about support and accountability. Obviously, like there's a huge component of that as well too. I mean, people need support, people need accountability, people need encouragement. People need someone to talk through all the stuff that they have going on to help them adhere to what's important to them. And so that's kind of a separate thing. So again, I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying there's anything wrong with being an online coach or whatever. But again, if you're going, it kind of gets, in my opinion, where people kind of get it a little out of their scope, where it's like, okay, well, maybe stick more with that adherence thing, maybe that nutrition thing, maybe that accountability thing. But realize if you haven't worked with people one-on-one, that exercise thing is kind of a big deal. It's hard to get around that, having worked with people, if you haven't actually done it in person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. I think there's loads of really good points there, and I'll just try and pick them out as we go through sort of in order.
Sure.
You talked about it, but I mean, you talked about your passion for training, and I think a key point you also said was your passion for helping other people get their results, which is something a lot of people that get in the industry miss out. But I'd be interested to know, you said you enjoyed training when you were in high school, like 3 times a day. Were you always interested in lifting and bodybuilding, or was it just physical exercise in general back then? How did that go?
It was a little bit of both, to be honest. So, I played a lot of sports, and I joke, I was like a good athlete. I was just like well-rounded at everything, but not exceptional. So I didn't play anything in university or anything like that. But I always enjoyed the physical component. Cause I mean, my first things, especially that I liked back then that I like in training is I'm hyper competitive, so there's a notion of being hyper competitive with yourself and with people you're training with. And then I also the whole, doing things that suck and are painful. Like I ran track, was one of the sports that I played. And so obviously anybody that's done track, it's some point in time, you're pushing yourself to your capacity, whatever distance you're running. And I was always like a mid distance guy. So I'd run the 800 meter or the mile or whatever. And so it's like, I liked that just because there'd be a point when you feel like you're obviously going to completely die and you're just seeing how hard you're still capable of pushing it. So right when I started working out, I mean, I got exposed right to like bodybuilding. So my brother had the Arnold's Encyclopedia of Modern Bodybuilding. So I did like right away, like, oh, holy shit, like people look like this. And it just appealed to me, obviously, of like, the whole looking like a superhero thing, whatever. And I was always, especially that time, I was always very small. Like I think by the time when I was 15 or 16, I didn't really hit like a growth spurt until I was 16, 17 or something. So, I mean, I think when I was like 15 years old, right when I started training, I think I was probably like 5'4", probably weighed 100 pounds or something. I was literally just emaciated. I looked like I was 12 when I was 15. And so there was a part of me, of course, for sure, that was like, I want to look like a man. and then so part of it, but then I liked all of it, to be honest. So there was this component of I want to change the way that I looked, but I loved going to the gym too and just trying to get stronger. I mean, because that was half like I loved going to the gym, trying to hurt myself, trying to hurt my training partners. I always had good training partners right from day one, honestly, of just we're going to go in and we're going to beat each other up. And we're going to go in and every single time try and lift more weights. And because in all honesty, my first 2 years of training in high school, I didn't know anything about recovery and I didn't care about it.
Yeah.
So I joke when I graduated high school, I grew vertically. I mean, I was 5 foot, same height I am now, 5'11" when I graduated high school. But I graduated high school weighing about 150 pounds. So like in my brain, I looked like I had muscle. But if you just tell me those statistics right now, 5'11", 150 pounds, it's like, no, you're basically your bone with a little bit of skin on top of it. So, but I was extremely lean. So it was like I had basically bone with a teeny bit of muscle on top of it. And of course I wore extra small shirts so everybody could see that teeny bump of muscle. So no, I think obviously anything right in the beginning, honestly, was much more performance based. It was like, I want to just train. I like that feeling of training hard. I like this feeling of getting stronger. And it wasn't really till college where I kind of really figured out how big of a component, obviously, like that whole recovery thing is. And that's when I really first started to take that serious. My first year in college, I tell people it's probably the time when I put on the most lean tissue in a relatively short period of time. And I actually scaled back from training 3 times a day to 2 a day. And then I was eating, that's the first time I ever ate, like a bodybuilder would eat and actually slept like a bodybuilder should sleep. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. It definitely always was a little bit of balance of performance, sport. I like the actual feeling, the physicality of training. And then obviously there was always a component, and it just shifted more to where like I kind of wanted to be, I wanted to look kind of like a bodybuilder, right? And I joke I had to train for I feel like I had to train for 10 years before somebody was like, hey, you like work out? I'm like, yeah, somebody asked if I worked out. All right, sweet. It took a while.
So that answers one of the questions, like, of course, were your genetics stellar, and were you like a sort of a really gifted athlete in that respect? So we've covered that. So you had to put the hard yards in and be consistent for a long period of time, which is good for people to hear. Because I think one of the other things people see on social media is they're genetically gifted with some assistance, and they look incredible, and they forget that, number one, they've got great genetics, number two, they've been doing this a long time. And then the unrealistic expectations sometimes really seems to get to people. A lot of people that I find, they're like, send me a picture of someone like a top pro, and they're like, can I look like this guy? And like, you're like, well, I mean, honestly, probably not. But even if you don't, if you get some of the way on the journey to there, you'll be pretty happy about it. So I think it's good for people to hear that it didn't come easy, basically.
Oh yeah. I joke. I would tell people that all the time. I mean, I kind of figured out in high school, my training partners all got stronger faster than me. I was kind of like, what's going on? But I was like, all right, whatever. And then in college was the first time, because I went to University of Florida, so big D1 school. So a lot of the athletes there are going to the NFL, going to whatever. That was the first time I was literally like exposed to like genetic freaks. I remember literally sitting in class, I'm in classes with someone that's a starter on the football team, 18, 19 years old. I'm 18 years old. And at that point in time, I'm maybe 170 pounds. And I look over, and there's next to me a guy that's maybe a linebacker, 240 pounds, lean, got a full beard. And I'm like, how are we the same age? Like, what the hell's going on here? And, so it's one of those things where people both ways, they kind of shoot themselves in the foot, where it's like, now somebody can't have a significant amount of muscle and be lean without everyone online being like, oh, they're on gear, they're juiced up. And I'm like, did you not have athletes around you growing up? I mean, I've seen some of the craziest genetic freaks. I mean, if people want to be mad about something, they should be mad about genetics, because that's definitely a much stronger thing than obviously the PEDs, which make a difference, of course, too. But I kind of just had this thing where I realized, okay, like, everyone in high school got stronger faster than me. I remember even I had one of the times, like, my my RA in my dorm was like, I'm going to start working out with you. And I was like, okay, great. And he ended up being a good training partner. But I literally remember I had been training probably, 3.5 years consistently. And within 3 months, he was bigger and stronger than me. I remember being like, what the hell's going on? And but anyway, so I saw that, where I kind of was realizing, okay, not everyone's the same, but I still like this whole thing. I kind of had the same thing that you said. It's like, well, I'm still making progress. And I was like, it'll just take longer, and I'll just kind of stick with it. And I do have, like, so I'd say my muscle building capacity is medium. It's not horrible. It's not great. And I have decent structure, so there's some things people get the two confused, where it's like, okay, well, muscle building capacity is one thing and bone structure is another thing, so I'm lucky I kind of have broader clavicles and just some okay structure too. So it's like, kind of a mixed bag, which I think most people really are. Most people, again, kind of, if they're having a hard time growing, they tend to not look at the fact that maybe they're not sleeping, eating, or training hard, and they blame their genetics. So again, it really is this double-edged sword. I see both sides, where, looking at someone with superior genetics can be frustrating to a degree, but at the same time too, people sometimes use that as an excuse, just ignoring the obvious. Like, well, you're not doing any of this stuff you should be doing anyway, regardless of your genetics. So
people are called behavioral hard gainers. Like, you are a hard gainer, but because of your behaviors, not because of anything that's actually holding you back. You're holding yourself back.
Exactly.
So I think there's a ton of people out there like that. And another interesting point I think that you mentioned is that people they're quick responders, but then this stuff takes time. So if you stay consistent, 10 years later, if you're still doing it, like, there's guys I started training with, responded way better, but 10 years later, I'm still training. They've given up. Well, surprisingly, I'm in better shape now than they are.
Yeah.
Admittedly, if they'd have stuck with it for 10 years, they'd probably be in far better shape than me. But the point is that you've got to keep doing it. And also, I just touching on the steroids or the performance enhancing drugs thing, I thought was interesting. Like, thought processes. If you think of the top bodybuilder at the Olympia, no doubt they're using plenty of stuff, but if they weren't using anything, just picture how they would look, and they would still look incredible. So it's not like they went from looking like they've never lifted a weight overnight because of the drugs. Those genetics were in place, and I think you can sort of reverse engineer that. If they're 270 pounds on stage shredded, they'd probably be 230 shredded. So they'd still look a whole lot better than you. Okay, so that's kind of a little side subject. Another one you mentioned that I want to talk about is sort of doing your time in the trenches as a coach in person, the importance of working with people to be able to then transition online. Now, I would 100% agree. I mean, it's not, never say never. It's not impossible to just be an online coach, but it's, for sure, in my experience, it's so much harder to coach someone remotely than it is in person. So you need to be a great in-person coach to have the chance of being a good online coach type thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's a key element for you to have highlighted earlier. So when you were working, how many hours were you coaching people, like on average per week?
When I started, I worked insane hours. So before I had kids, my average day I'd have clients, so I'd say from age 22, probably until my first son was born, I'd have a client at 5 a.m. or 5:30 every day as soon as the gym would open. And I'd normally be in the gym training until, 7, 8 p.m. And that'd be like pretty much Monday through Friday. And then I'd work half days on Saturday was the structure that I stuck with. How I would do it too is the gyms that I was at, I liked the structure of it where, again, it was, I had like set aside, it was almost like the management job was almost kind of part-time. So I had preset like every day from, I believe it was 1 to 4, I had set management hours, basically paid a salary and work commissions for and stuff. And so that was my day every single day is I would train from, 5 to 5:30 right straight through until 1. And then I do manager stuff from 1 to 4. And then I train another, 3 hours or so of clients in the afternoon. And I even had to the point when I was at the busiest, I'd always have a client that I would train with for my session as well too. Cause I'd be like, okay, well, I'm going to make money from this client. And then also I used to just say, I was like, oh, you're getting the A+ treatment. You're going to train with me, which is the best training you're going to get. So they would always be pumped about it. And then I'd be happy because I joke. I was like, that's the first time I was a professional bodybuilder. I'm like, I'm getting paid to work out right now. I'm a pro bodybuilder. So it was a lot. I loved it. I liked the whole component. I would joke that I would probably lived on at least, maybe a gram, so 1,000 milligrams of caffeine a day for a good decade of my life, which I don't recommend doing. It was definitely the, burning the candle at both ends period of time in my life. But at the same time, it's one of those things where, I took so much from that as far as obviously working, because it was great. I honestly loved working with normal people, and I loved working with, I had clients that were in their 80s and their 90s. I'd work with people in wheelchairs. And then probably after a solid 5 years of training, I just started to progress more towards physique athletes just because I enjoyed it a little bit more. And as often with a lot of things, if you enjoy it, you tend to be a little bit better at it. And but all that was great. And so, I think that was just a huge thing for me. When I was transitioning, if I look at things, the way people look at things when they're purely online and the way coaches that actually train with people and interact with people look at things are different. And I always joke where it's some of the stuff that people want to argue about online or fight about online. I'm like, you wouldn't even have more than like a 6-second conversation about this with another coach. Coach is like, oh, here's why, I prefer training, some people to failure. Oh, here's why I prefer training this split and blah, blah. And you'd be like, oh, cool. That makes sense. And that'd be the end of it. It'd be like, here's 2 different concepts, 2 different application. And then, some of it's just with their clients. And now online, obviously everybody makes these relatively small details, in my opinion, and turns them into these giant things. Where it's like, well, if you were actually, that's for me, when I see people that get upset about things and argue about little stuff, I'm like, well, you're just telling me you've never actually worked with anyone in real life, because you wouldn't feel that way about this stuff that really doesn't matter much. So yeah, that was a huge thing for me is I literally, and I still now, I try and always train a little bit. So I always still try and train, a few hours a week now, but it's much less than it was, but it was a slow transition. So, again, that was up to age, I was 30 when I had my first son. And so basically right when I had him is the first time I was like, oh, holy crap, I'm going to start like missing out on his life. So I was like cutting back to like 60 hours a week at that point in time. But even then I kind of knew I wanted to try and start to transition to like online. Cause even as much as I liked working 60 hours a week, I'm still like, well, this still isn't good for having like a family and stuff. So basically from age, 31, when I started social media stuff up till maybe, where I'm at now, I probably had about 3 or 4 years where I was doing both at the same time. So I was training in person was my predominant income, and I was slowly building up the online thing until the point where I can transition to the point where I don't actually have to train people in person anymore. And now it's kind of purely like the online deal.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's interesting. And interesting, I think, how you sort of found your clientele and how you drifted. Like you trained a broad spectrum of people, and then you found what you really enjoyed. So your passion within the passion, and then that's when you went all in on. And I think that's also important for people starting their career, because lots of guys, they sort of seem to come in with that, I'm only going to work with this person, but you have to earn the right to be that coach, the go-to guy for this very specific skill set. And I think that's again a mistake people make. I suppose it's a little bit like early sports specialization. You hear people, bit like in terms of youth athlete, they talk about this is, give them expose them to a variety of sports. you'll learn so much from that 70, 80-year-old client that you may not, you don't realize initially how that could be applicable, but it'll help you with other guys. But learning what you really like. So my thing in person, I like training with anyone who wants to work quite hard, right? Because I'm limited by, distance to some extent. There's only so far they're going to travel. Yeah. Online, however, it's much more targeted in terms of the people I'll work with. They fit a certain demographic. And I think that's a useful thing. Just a little side thing that popped in from what you'd said. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you said. I mean, I agree with everything that you said, and I say honestly, a huge issue I think that people have is, and this obviously expands to something bigger, and obviously expands to something that I'm not qualified to diagnose in people. But people aren't capable of just being, content is maybe not the right word, but to a degree, content where you're at in life, and then also actively, making the most of or seeking the value of where you're at in life. Because I can honestly say that I was never, even now, I'm not like, I have obviously a direction of moving forward where it's like, okay, here's the next thing. Here's the next thing. I've never been one of those guys where it's like, all right, my life goal is to be an entrepreneur, where some people are like, I don't really care what I'm doing. I just want to make sure that I'm on a laptop on a private jet and letting people know that I'm influencing people. Like that was never a goal. Like I obviously want to make an income that reflects my value. I obviously, if I can be more comfortable providing for my family, fantastic. But I was always the person, like at every point in time in my life, like at every different job I've had, I can honestly tell people I was happy when I was there. Like even when my first job was working in a grocery store, my very first job, fucking bagging groceries and shit. And I remember people just being so miserable. And I'm not like saying that I was like skipping into work and like having a great time. But I remember like this didn't quite click, but it clicked pretty early on for me. That like I was like, well, like customer service is important, right? And so literally my first job was a customer service job. It's like you're dealing with people that are just coming in, they want groceries, they want a store, they want to find their stuff, they want to clean, whatever. And so obviously that's the first time I'm confronted with, okay, well, how do I deal with issues? How do I deal with people? And I honestly, looking back, like that was valuable for me, obviously learning a lot from there. And then, like you said, then as soon as you start to work with normal people, and I have people all the time that look at like who I work with, which again, of course, is fun. But when I was working with normal people, I like that as well too. Yeah. It's like it's actually the first time where I tell people like it wasn't like a switch for me. You wouldn't ask me at 22 years old and just say, oh, I've got this huge passion for helping people lose weight, and I'll cry about it because I'm so passionate. I'd be like, no, I'm being honest. I was like, well, this is kind of what the personal trainers do. They help people with this, and I wanted to help people, but it really wasn't until I started to go through the process and actually have, like, when I'm 22, what the hell do I know about being someone that's middle-aged and overweight and maybe stressed at work, the stress, like stuff that I'm starting to understand more now. But at 22, I had no idea what's going on. So if you're listening and you're 22, you have no idea what's going on, and that's fine. And start listening to people, because that's what it was when I would actually listen to like normal people. You have people that had a high level of success maybe somewhere in their life, but they struggle with their nutrition, or they struggle with sleep, or whatever it was. And it was all about prioritizing, right? It's like, okay, you might look at someone that's overweight and be like, oh, well, that's, the dumb meathead will be like, oh, that person doesn't have discipline, blah, blah, whatever. And it's like, well, they could actually have 10 times more discipline than you. They built a business. They're a good parent. They've got a happy family life. And this same dumb meathead that's picking on them for being overweight, it's like, well, the only thing good in your life may be your physique. You may have no money, you may have no career, you have a horrible relations, maybe not. I mean, obviously that's just an example. But so it's cool. I loved all that. I liked working with normal people and actually trying to turn myself into more of a grown-up by listening to people that were successful grown-ups in other areas of life. And so, like, yeah, you said that, because whether you're going to be working with people in person, teaching some muscle building thing or something specific, or you're going to be online coaching, like that's it, right? I mean, working with normal people has very little to do with the X's and O's, and everything to do with like, can they tell that you actually care about them? And then from there, are you really constantly working through stuff? Because again, 99% of people aren't in shape because it's not because they don't know the X's and O's, right? I mean, as much as the industry will want to pump, here's the secret diet, here's what Oprah's doing now. Obviously, that's the dumbest shit in the entire world. Like, my grandparents are in their 80s and they've been in shape their whole life. And what's the key to it? Is like, well, they eat moderation and they try and, walk outside a lot every single day. There you go. There's everybody write that down. That's the secret to it. My grandparents solved it and they continue to solve it. So a lot of things, obviously, if you're trying to have 22-inch arms, there might be something a little bit more specific there. But especially for general population, again, do they know that you care about them? Are you actively trying to communicate with them? Are you working through everything that they have going on? And that's massively important. So that's why, again, I didn't want anybody thinking that I'm saying the online coaching thing is bad. But if you, especially if you want to go though, if you're just, even if you want to get into it and say, oh, I'm going to be an online coach, that's what I want to do kind of from day one, not even doing the person, I would just have the realization that your job is so much more dealing with all the human things that make people humans, much more so than, because again, I mean, how hard is, if someone wants to lose weight, here's 4 exercises that are a good total body workout. Oh, they find that boring. Here's 4 substitute exercises, and you can rotate between, I mean, it's not rocket science. And then it's just dealing with the person, are they actually working hard with it? Are they taking ownership, or are they just going through it? And so it's not really like, oh, well, again, the average person, their knee bend was off by 0.6 degrees or something, or, they don't have bands and chains properly set up. That doesn't matter for them. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, everything that you said is, I think that's just a huge thing for people. And I had people, every time I would go from one job to the other, I'd have people like, man, are you happy to get out of here? I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, I like this job. I've always liked where I'm at. I've always found value when I'm at. And that's even on paper. I've been through some things that if you looked at, you'd be like, you were having a good time then? And I was like, well, maybe a couple of those things, if you focus on them, no. But if I was staying at a job, I was actively staying there. If you really hate something, I'm not saying that that's not going to happen. I had one job where I was working for a company, it got bought by another company, and within 1 week I was like, okay, I don't want to work for this company. And I didn't sit around and bitch and complain about it and be negative to everyone around me. I just actively started thinking about, okay, how am I going to move to another company? And then within a month or two, I'd professionally move to another company. So yeah, I think it's that doesn't mean just stay anywhere that you hate, and it's obviously not good. Obviously work out of something that clearly isn't a good fit, but at the same time, find the value in the time of wherever you're at, whenever you're there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway. Just sort of a little life lesson there. That's very useful. And then I want to transition now onto CPD, because you mentioned that and the importance of it, and I completely agree. And then something you said just a couple of minutes ago, though, got me thinking as well, though. I love geeking out about program design or exercise execution, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that sort of gets me interested. But then you've got to realize the person you're dealing with, and maybe some of your clients like geeking out about that as well. But most of my clients, they're like, no, tell me why this is going to help. And then the thought I had when you were talking earlier was almost like, you write a program, but then everything you are after you do that is coaching. It's not like the amazing program. It's like, how can I coach them through this process? And I think that's something that a lot of us geeks that are getting in because we're fascinated by training need to remember, that the stuff that's really going to add value is that ability to coach people through the process. With that said, CPD, you've done a bunch of courses, obviously, and if I think look on your Instagram, there's a fair collection you can see just in the bio. Now, well, not so much recommending this course or that course, but some of the things and the journey and how I know mine's been a bit scattergun. I've been, this shiny object syndrome. I'm interested in this, and then you're over here and zigzagging around. And to some extent, that's been really valuable because I've found my way through it.
For sure.
But did you have a strategy the way you approached CPD, or was it more a case of you just happened to land on Poliquin stuff, which was awesome back in the day?
Yeah.
And then went that way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and I'll answer it hopefully a couple of ways. So, honestly, first off, just came from, again, the Poliquin thing was I had someone that I knew. So again, I had this mentor that had prior to me 10 years of success in the industry, doing the things that I wanted to do. So this guy was an incredible business. He was an incredible talker. So again, he was if you want to look at it like sales, he was great at sales, but it's because he was an amazing trainer, and then he was just confident and articulate. And so again, when he recommended to me Poliquin, that's the first part. I mean, obviously, if I know someone that I can actually see is translating his education into results, then that was kind of the first stamp of approval. And I was like, all right. And so really, I just kind of fell into Poliquin stuff in the first place. And then pretty quickly, so the 2 lessons that I learned, because I think my first 2 years, it was all Poliquin stuff. So maybe I went through, his PICP1, then 2, and then did his biosignature, and then did one of his, trying to remember, he had a PIMS course or something. I mean, so he had some courses that were kind of more specialized or whatever. And, so one, I found the huge value right away to learn from someone that was, obviously intelligent, a lot of good on paper stuff, but all of it went through the filter of application, because he was a guy that was saying, well, obviously he had a lot of evidence for the things that he did, but he'd also be the same in the words like, well, I've been using this one thing for a decade producing results, and then now there's research showing the benefit. He's like, he used to say, sure, I don't know if he was the first one, but it's like the people that wait on research to prove their methods. He's like, we call them historians. That doesn't have any value really in the field. And so, that's a huge thing. I think if people are looking for continuing education, not necessarily if it's one individual, but to some degree, normally starts with an individual, then the group of educators involved with it, are they actually helping people? Are they actually producing results? Are they doing things that are going to improve actual gym decisions or whatever you're doing on a daily basis? So I think, obviously evidence, and there's a whole bunch of things that go in there, and then evidence and results, so that's a part of evidence, are massively important. So, all that was great right away because then I was around other coaches and getting in that environment. But I figured out real fast, and I don't remember if it was from specific conversations for people, but when Poliquin would talk, it would be like half of it. I was like, man, I'm dumb. I don't understand any of this. And I honestly almost half beat myself up. It's like, man, that's a coach. I'm never going to be a coach. I'm too dumb. And so I had some good advice. I don't remember who it was. Some people saying, well, you can go through a Poliquin course sometimes and get frustrated thinking that you have to be like Poliquin. And then it sounds kind of cheesy, but then people are like, well, you don't have to be like Poliquin. You have your own things that obviously you can excel at. You don't have to be an encyclopedia that can remember every study you've ever read. And, so one, that was pretty good. But then two, I kind of realized that too, that I joke with every single, certification or course, there's the Kool-Aid. So there's basically just stuff that is just like, hey, here's this stuff that we do. Just take it because we tell you. And so meaning, even if I thought 70% of Poliquin's information was amazing, there was 30% that was either like, it could be my own not understanding. So there's always the reality that maybe I just didn't get something or didn't get the application. But some of it I'm like, I don't really know about that, or I don't get that. And so I remember realizing the problem is you get people that go through courses and they just like get embedded in that group and they just turn it into a religion where it's like everything within this group is the best. And again, it's the straw man thing where it's like, and if you're not in this group, just as a result, your stuff is horrible or stupid or has no value. So, I think it's very important for people to not get caught up just in one group of people. Because again, even if I was start to do more continuing education on my own, I never tell people, hey, just my app, just my site. It's like, no, like take information from lots of places. I would never recommend somebody do something that I didn't do myself. And so, when looking for courses, I always say like, look, people that like to turn things into a religion, they kind of say this course is good, this is bad, this is dumb, and they want to like battle with each other. I said, instead of trying to pick apart the little things that they do different, I say focus on groups or education that do things. What do they do similar? Because again, what are they actually doing that's improving people's lives or producing results? And with that, from different courses and different scopes, you can start to say, okay, I'm going to put all my time and effort on what are they doing that works, so I can make sure that what I'm doing works. So I think overall, that's why you can take so much stuff from so many different places. If you kind of go on that mindset and think, how will this help people? How can I actually translate this into gym decisions? What can I actually start applying with my clients, right now? And then, like you said, like almost every course I've taken has been like, there's something, every course I've taken, there's been some degree of value from it. And then the worst case scenario, like I went and took, I did the intro level stuff for MAT, muscle activation technique. And I took a lot of value from there, just understanding some of the concepts of kind of challenging how some of the industry says, hey, this is tight, you got to stretch it. This is weak, you got to strengthen, some of that old kind of broken model, in my opinion. And so there's a lot of good things that I took away from there. But I remember when I was actually getting into learning, here's the positions, here's the isometrics, here's when we move into tactile stuff. And you realize, man, this is like a therapy thing. This is a therapist route. I remember actually literally talking to the instructor after I was done with the entire course and been like, so like, obviously right now, like if I want to do this, I suck at it. And I was like, how long would it take me to just be like mediocre at this? And it's like, well, 10 years. And it's like, okay, so I'd have to start, putting 20 plus hours a week towards this alone. And I'd have to do it for 10 years to be okay at it. And so I figured out real quick, it's like, well, I don't want to do that. So it's like, I don't technically apply any MAT stuff. I don't do any MAT stuff on anybody. But I still wouldn't look at that course as a waste. Like you said, I went to it, I took some value from it, and I also got kind of pointed even more in the right direction of here's where I'm going to put my time and effort. And so yeah, with course taking, I mean, those are the filters that I would go through is, look for people actually producing results, look for some courses where there's going to be some beneficial crossover from course to course. And then again, just don't turn it into a religion. So anybody you go to, no matter how much you like them or whatever, just, that's just the person or a group teaching you stuff with, and then just try and get very, kind of analytical and unbiased and look at the information, the evidence they're giving you and just kind of put it in your brain and then it'll do what it's supposed to do over time. And then the last thing I would say too is just do stuff in person. I mean, I know that's not the great advice right now because everyone's like, well, F you, there's nothing in person now. Do something where you can communicate with another human or another coach. at least now a lot of people are doing stuff live. So you can still do, webinar stuff, and you still have the opportunity to interact with, either an educator or a group of educators. I mean, that interaction and that dialogue is massive, because the problem with online stuff is people think they're having a dialogue, but they're not. They're having a monologue with themselves, right? So it's like they'll read something that a coach says, and as soon as they might take it, which might be some degree of communication from a coach, but then they put it through their own brain. So they take it and they say, oh, this is what that means, which may or may not be accurate. And then they basically say, oh, well, this is what that means. Oh, that's dumb. Oh, this is whatever. So people will look at people's stuff, have a conversation only with themselves, and put it in a place where it's either maybe it's too great or it's too dumb or whatever, or it's right or wrong. And so I think that's a huge thing. It's why in-person stuff is so important. One, because obviously training's in person, touching people, understanding people's bodies and things like that are important. But also just because you need to have that dialogue. You need to have the conversations about not just what it is, but also the conversations about, well, how is this applied? To who is this applied to? When do you apply it? And all that kind of stuff and that's the specifics we joke. I joke, I give one example of, people take stuff out of context. I don't know if you saw, but there was at one point in time where I made a post about this little V handle, and I made a joke. I called it the baby handle. It was basically implying how it's not great for most large individuals. And so the joke is I know Fuad a little bit. If anybody doesn't know Fuad, professional bodybuilder. And so he was actually very politely and professionally giving me shit on the post and basically saying, well, I like it. And, and I was kind of like, well, why do you like it? And he's like, well, I feel it here and blah, blah, blah. And so the joke is he has a podcast. So he's like, let me get you on the podcast. Let's have a talk about this. And so the whole funny thing is the whole podcast, I'm explaining some of the reasons from hopefully an evidence base. Here's some mechanics. Here's how this pulls, and here's what we're trying to target. But then the whole joke I had with him when I was with it, I was like, man, if let's say hypothetically you said, hey, Joe, help me with my programming. And within your programming, you said, hey, this close grip cable pull is my favorite for back. I wouldn't even have a conversation with you after that. You know what I mean? It's like, so we're discussing purely principles. Like, obviously there's a reason I don't prescribe that to somebody that I don't know that has a structure like mine because of these on paper things. That being said, when it actually is an individual coaching thing, the same if I was with a client, if I'm like going over to the row and they're like, oh, maybe I'd make them try something wider. How does that feel? Like, oh no, I love this. I'm like, okay, cool. Let's keep that in there. And so that's like, I thought that was one example of like, literally the whole thing turned into the joke. I made this post I didn't think anybody was actually going to care about. And like the world exploded. Like apparently people are very attached to that little handle. And I was like, that's the biggest difference here is not that I have a different belief on what this does to your body from maybe a mechanic standpoint. I just have a different belief of like view of that handle. To me, it's just a piece of metal. It is what it is. So again, it's from people having this whole monologue. They read what I wrote. They have a monologue with themselves and they like it. And they say, I don't like that guy. F you. And that's the end of the conversation. Whereas again, if we are actually having a dialogue in person, I'd be like, oh, that's your favorite handle? You feel good in your back? They'd be like, yeah. I'm like, okay, cool. We're keeping that in your programming. So it'd be 9 seconds and over with, as opposed to 20 bajillion comments on a post and everybody getting angry and all mad and having to go on a podcast to talk about it. But
that's funny. I'll tell you why it's funny, because one of my clients had a little mini meltdown because he follows you and he's got this handle in his home gym and he loves it. It's like his favorite thing. Yeah. Genuinely, he was like, have you seen this post? And like sent it to me. And I was like, yeah, don't worry. Like, it's cool. You like that handle. Like, but we'd even had a similar conversation about look, this is what some of the limitations, and based on the fact that your shoulders are considerably wider than that and you want to grow your lats, why this may not be. But even with that, he's just like, fuck, have you seen Joe said this handle stupid, and he was having a little moment. Anyway, we got past it. It was pretty funny. The other thing you mentioned just in there was principles, the word principles, and I think that's a key thing. I think you had a really good sort of list of things to think about with your CPD, but people that teach principles rather than protocols, for want of a better phrase, they'll let you go away and put your spin on the information that they've provided. And I think that's a really crucial thing. And the funny one, again, like you talked about Poliquin, like Charles was such a powerful character that I think we're all guilty of it. We'd walk away and we'd all basically be mini Charles clones for a couple of weeks with our clients in the gym, and then until our clients pointed out that we turned into an arsehole overnight, and that we were very different. But I've spoken to some other people who have been on and used his courses, and they had a similar experience. And when you kind of realize, I'm not going here just to be like this guy, but I'm trying to take what they have to offer and use it myself. That's a really crucial thing. So we're sort of working our way through your career and building all these elements together. We're now on my notes. Social media, that's the point we got to. Like, I quite like it because you've got a strong social media game, right? Like the social media, it looked like, and you're doing really well on it. And I would assume, from that you really enjoyed it from the get-go. Now, I'm not really, I'd have to say something, not really an early adopter, not really that big a fan of it, but I recognize its value. And if you're running a business, you'd be foolish not to utilize these things. So you said you sort of had to have it taught to you, like as if you're an 80-year-old grandma who'd never used it before. Then you also mentioned, maybe we'll get into some strategies in the course. So obviously there's been a journey for you from not knowing how this thing works to having some strategies in place that obviously work. So you talked about basically having your own voice, and I thought to myself, you didn't seem to be worrying about the algorithm. You were like, I'm going to put out valuable content that resonates with people, or hopefully resonates with people. And if I do that enough, build a relationship, hey presto, things start to take care of themselves. But what other key things have there been that you on your journey with growing a social media following, but also a following that builds a business off the back of it, not just likes for the sake of likes, and follows something that actually converts into building a business that people want. What have you found along the way?
Yeah, for sure. So it's one of these weird balance things where there's like, it's like any job where it's like, okay, if you look at being a personal trainer, I don't think it's bad that there's some parts that you view as just a job, because if somebody looked at my job and like, do you really like re-racking weights? I'm like, well, not particularly. Yeah, that's a huge percentage of my job. I don't want to know how many days of my life I've technically spent re-racking weights. So, there's this balance. I don't think there's a job in the world, no matter how amazing some parts of it are, where there's not some re-racking weights. Some of it you just got to do what you got to do because that's, existing as someone that has work ethic. So I say all that because, I just want to label social media probably for a lot of the things that a lot of people do. We're like, well, this is this purely superficial, ridiculous thing. Why would I want to be a part of this? But then when you realize, obviously, like, well, do you like helping people? And do you like consuming information? Because, at that point in time, it's not like it was a little bit of a transition point. Social media like Instagram wasn't quite the way that it is now, where it was more just superficial stuff. But there were things that I was like, man, well, I like reading articles by coaches. I like watching videos by coaches. And, I like going on YouTube, and some things are just purely coaching stuff. And I also certainly like to watch Ronnie Coleman work out, because who the hell doesn't want to watch Ronnie Coleman work out? So I got to realize too that some of it was just my own thing as I got caught up on the exact medium and my initial perception of it. And then you realize it's like, well, this is just an opportunity, to help people. So once I kind of came to terms with that, from there, it really does have to be kind of your own thing. And I would say for the number one thing that people need to start with, if they want to make it part of their business, when I was first starting, I had good advice from Bennett, where I literally said, like, what the hell am I supposed to do? Like, what's the point of this? Because I hadn't thought about, I didn't get into it with, I'm going to do this to build an online business. I got into it because everybody said, you have to do this. Mm-hmm. And I just remember like, okay, well, what the hell is the goal of doing this? And he said, don't think about what you want to do with it yet. Just establish yourself as an expert, just establish your level of expertise and just figure out the rest from there. And I'm like, okay, because if I think about it, when I would read articles by stuff, I'm like, okay, well, who is this person? Are they a coach? Are they qualified? Why would I listen to them? And then even if they were qualified on paper, like I'd listen to the way they'd talk or they'd write, and things would relate to me. And I'm like, okay, I want to learn more from this human being. So the things that I was like, I think that the two things that people can do that really start to have some structure, the kind of job part of it is, one, establish a schedule. So right from day one, just establish a content schedule. Don't say I'm going to do social media because I have to do social media, because that's the same as someone's like, well, I want to lose weight, so I'm going to start dieting with no specifics. It's like, oh, I ordered a salad today instead of this. Like that's very general, right? The same as anything in life, you need to have some structured habits. So literally, there's no wrong schedule. Obviously, in reality, is once a week better than once a month? Probably. But even if you do something once a month, people will expect your content at a consistent rate. So whatever you can actually commit to, and then just don't make it a bigger deal than it really is. Because that's the thing. I think other people, it's a little bit of a side note. People are like, well, I don't want to do it once or twice a week because, I got to have this perfect post or this perfect thing, and it takes me forever. I'm like, first off, if it takes forever, don't do it. If you need to just be comfortable talking about, writing about what you do as a profession, so establish a schedule, say once a week, twice a week, whatever it is. These are the times, these are the days, write it down on paper, make it a part of your job. From there, once you kind of figure out what you want to do, you might have to schedule some time as well too. How long does a post take me? When am I going to set aside for that? But for most people, it shouldn't be that hard, right? So I say, look at what you're doing in your given day. Hopefully, if you're working with some clients in whatever capacity, and literally just make a list of the categories of everything that you do that helps them produce results. So all the things that we've talked about, which could be their split. It could be specific split, exercise selection, as far as why am I doing this rep range? Why am I doing this intensity relative to failure? And then all the other stuff like, well, what do I use for coaching cues? How do I tell them to get their form good? How do I get them to do it here when it starts to get hard? Why did I choose this split for this person, but that person didn't like it and I did this split for another person? How do I get this person to adhere? What are the conversations we have outside of the session? How do I communicate with these people that I'm sending them a diet or when I have to get on a call with them? There should be an endless list of those, could all be categories. And then within the categories, just start writing stuff. And then from there, it's as simple as, okay, well, is this a physical action? So again, I'm talking about an exercise. Okay, well, the next time you're training, film the exercise for 30 seconds. That's done. Leave it aside, whatever it is. Or if I'm having a conversation with a person and we're talking about adherence, you can literally write. That's half thing. People get caught up. I got to do this fancy thing or whatever. I don't want to say that I started it, but a lot of times when I do a post, I would literally go on my notes section. I'd write, adherence, blah, 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 and I'd take a screenshot of it, and that'd be my post. It's not fancy. It's not pretty. It's not an infograph or whatever. And then I'd write about, okay, well, when I'm with clients, this is why I found, I've been flexible with the type of diet they do, or why I'm flexible with the type of split they do. Because again, if they don't adhere to it, nothing matters, blah, 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 whatever. So it's as simple as if someone just spends some time making this massive list, because again, you could sit for an hour and write everything that you do with any client that you've ever had ever that's helped them produce results. And you're going to have an endless list of things. And then just figure, is it something that a picture works? Here's a before and after. Here's what happened with this person. A video works. Here's this, someone working hard. Here's someone doing a specific exercise. Or is it a conversation where it's literally just, do a picture of a topic or whatever. I never got into the pictures where people take like professional shots, like sitting on steps thinking and just saying, and then from there, adherence. That's what I'm sitting on these steps thinking about, adherence, whatever. But that's not bad either. I mean, especially if I just never thought I was that good looking. So if I was good looking enough where people would see the picture and be like, oh, he looks good. Let's hear what he has to say. So maybe if that's your thing, use those pictures, have at it. But so that's the stuff where, again, if you're actually going to start taking steps, like why it's the same thing. Hopefully think about the things that if you're a coach and you like learning from other coaches, just think about that stuff. Like I just wanted to hear about what produced results. I wanted to hear about their thought process, and I wanted to everything around that I found interesting. So if people just start to realize that it's not that hard. So if you take a video of an exercise, then when you actually prescribe that and whatever, don't try and write like Joe Bennett writes. Don't try and write like some other, like Charles Poliquin wrote, because it's just going to make your head hurt. Say, hey, here's why I picked this, as opposed to this, or here's why I tell them this, or here's how I got this person to work hard. And someone's going to relate to you, right? So a lot of people, again, they get the same thing that I did. They see Charles Poliquin. I'm like, well, I'm not an expert compared to that. So I can't start writing stuff. No one's going to listen. Well, the reality is if you're new, you're going to have people that are newer that will listen to you, or people that are along the journey at the same spot that will listen to you. And then once you get in a habit, before you know it, you've got a year of experience, 3 years of experience, 5 years of experience, and there's a whole host of people that came before you. And so that's why I think people is, if you're legitimately talking about something that will produce results, that's providing value. And if you do that, consistently enough, you're going to find an audience in some capacity. And then obviously if you can do things that are like icing on the cake, where it's like, it's the whole, don't ignore reality, so it's obviously if you're a coach and you're in good shape, there's nothing wrong with, like, that's why I'll show like contest pictures or something when I competed. It's like, well, to a certain extent is, yeah, you want to show people that you walk the walk. Like I joke, if you're better looking than me and, that's helps your business, I have pictures of you looking good looking and then talking about something important after or whatever. So I don't think there's anything wrong with obviously, showing some things or talking about things that are, and I don't know if sensationalize the right thing, but I'll even do a joke about that where I'll do like a post where it says, training to failure versus, reps in reserve, and make it seem like it's going to be this argument. And I'll even joke, I'm like, hey, hopefully you clicked on my clickbait. Now that you're here, let's have a logical discussion about this type of thing, So it's, again, I don't think there's anything wrong with just kind of understanding some of the things of what's going to make your content do better or worse. If you can do something, if you're on YouTube, obviously take a little bit of time to figure out what is a good cover, what do people like, just as opposed to a screenshot with you picking your nose in the middle of a conversation or something. I don't know. So that's some of the advice that I would give. It's establish a schedule, map out your own content in your own language, your own words, and then just choose methods that are easy that you can actually do. Because again, I would say, in the beginning, I wouldn't even say this. I mean, sometimes things take me a little bit longer to write, but basically even if I had this long thing, I just sit down and start writing. I wouldn't go back and edit it and re-edit and blah, blah, and all this kind of stuff. It's like, no, I'd go sit down. I'd talk about something. I might read through it one more time. I'd post it, and then I'd tell my wife, I said, hey, if you see any typos in there, let me know, and I'll go back and fix them. It's not like this. For me, it was never a big production. It's still not technically a big production. It's just something that you can actually just do and just talk and just have at it, and then just obviously stick with consistently. And that's going to go a long way towards building your thing. And again, if you're looking at it from a pure profession standpoint, I mean, there are people that have, people are like, oh, I want 1 billion followers. Would never focus on that ever. I mean, there's people that have, 5,000 followers that make more money than people that have 1 million followers.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, it's the whole joke. I don't like to say this part because it turns some people off, but if this is your business, you don't need followers, you need buyers.
Mm-hmm.
How many
Yes.
people are actually trust you enough to give you their income? And that's just the reality. Would you want 5,000 people that are your followers that 4,000 of them are going to buy something from you? If you have 4,000 that people are going to buy anything from you, it's not hard to make a good income,
Yes.
right? You could have 1 million followers, and people are, again, if some people have 1 million followers based solely on their abs or their butt looks good, but they can't sell a t-shirt, so it's, again, do you want to be famous? I can't relate to that. I that sounds like my nightmare. But if you want to be, respected and people to have, know that you have a level of expertise, then you're going to find your niche. You're going to find your group.
Yeah, I think that's awesome advice. Absolutely brilliant, Joe. Really think there's loads of value in there. Essentially, what we've got here is a fitness business mentorship, like little Joe Bennett mentorship.
Sweet, let's have at it.
So you've just wandered us through nightly. So that'll be coming soon on Hypertrophy Coach.
Yeah.
But I think that was fantastic and loads of great value for people there. The one thing that popped in my head from something you said earlier again, you talked about like sometimes the only thing good in like a bodybuilder's life is their physique, and they're no good at all these other things. Like people, you have the skills to be disciplined and create a schedule and put the emphasis there to get results. If you treat Instagram or social media the same way, you have all those skills. It's just about then applying them to that setting. So, like you said, scheduling, making it a priority, all these things. So I think that's a cool takeaway for everyone, that they have the skill, now they just need to apply it if they really want to focus on that. We're running up on time. You've been very kind with your time, and we've overrun a little bit. Before we go, I have a few quick fire questions for you, and a couple of very short questions, and then let everyone know where they can find out more about you. So
sure.
Either or questions first of all. Pizza or burger?
I'd have to go pizza, I'd say.
Okay. Chocolate or peanut butter?
Peanut butter.
Beach holiday or a city break?
Beach holiday.
Okay. Steak rare or well done?
Rare.
Eggs scrambled or poached?
Probably scrambled.
Right. Last question from me, because I'm growing a very pathetic little beard here compared to how long's that beard been going for? I mean,
it doesn't
forever.
take long to be. Yeah, I did. Well, I don't know. I've had it now for, I don't know. Let me think. I think going on 3-4 years. It honestly, it grows pretty fast. I joke, don't look at my beard. It's genetics. Unless you have my parents, it's not worth it. But yeah, the joke. I have my beard entirely because of my wife. I grew it out at one point in time, and she liked it, and I was like, okay, well, as long as you like it, I'm gonna have a beard.
There we go.
And yeah.
I was hoping for some beard growing tips there.
No, I got nothing.
Okay, can you tell me something about you that people probably don't already know? This is the question that usually gets people, a bit of silence, and gets them stumped for a few seconds. But is there anything out there?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, there's probably lots of things. I mean, the only things that I think people know this about me pretty well, but I'm just a huge. I mean, I'll think of two things that pop up in my brain for whatever reason. One is relatively unimportant, and the other is relatively important. But like, probably one thing that probably people don't know about me is there was a time. I mean, still, I honestly haven't probably golfed in a few years, but I was more into golf probably than working out at some point in time, and even within my peak of working out. And there was actually a point in time where I was debating, like, how much time do I want to try and put in? Because I played high school level golf, but just wasn't that great after that. And I was kind of self-taught. I never really had the money for like lessons and all that kind of stuff. So there's a point where I thought, like, well, what if I actually get some professional coaching? Like, how good at golf could I be? So yeah, I'm still to this day now, just because of my priorities. Right now, I just can't like leave my family. Like, hey, I'll be gone for 4 hours to go golf. See you later. Like, I just can't. One, I love my family, but two, I would just feel like an asshole. And not that that's wrong for people to do, obviously, to keep balance in life. But I love golf, man. I'm an actually pretty damn good golfer. The funny thing is when people see me on the golf course, like, this isn't normal for the golf course. Yeah. So people always, and the funny thing is I'm a pretty big hitter. But I was actually much longer, because right now I weigh 225, 230. And when I probably weighed right around 200 pounds, I mean, I was a seriously, long hitter. So now people see me like, oh, you hit so far because you're big. I was like, no, actually, I've lost yards because I can't move as well.
Yeah.
So that's probably one thing. I'm really, really into golf. And then basically as soon as my kids are into it, I mean, that's like retirement for me. Retirement will be, I'll still work out in the morning and then just golf every single day. That would be nice. And so there's one thing. And the other thing that I think people know about me is like the more important thing is I'm just an insanely like family's a huge deal for me. So again, if I have kind of like I indicate, if I have free time, it's always been like this, family and friends. I'm lucky enough that I have some friends, like again, small group of some friends that I've known for 20 plus years that I consider the same as family. And so if I have free time, that's where I spend it. So family, friends, I'm even like, I'm very close to my parents. I'm still very close with grandparents, aunts, uncles, my brother, and all that. So again, if I literally have free time, like the last vacation I took, even now, was a family vacation, so I took my family with, my parents and my brother and, obviously my nieces and nephews. And, so yeah, that's if I have any free time now, pretty much 100% goes to them, revolves around them. And that's why I joke with anytime anybody wants to have conversations with me about, business and all this and that, I half joke. I'm like, I don't know if it's good or bad, but I don't have much. As for highly competitive as I am, there was a time when I just wanted to make money, because I was like, just making more money is competition, right? So here's how much money I made this year. I just want to make more. And then honestly, as soon as I kind of had a switch flip, as soon as I had kids, where like literally it's like I could care less about money in any capacity aside from providing for them. So it's like, all right, now the school I send them to costs money, and obviously I want them to eat and do normal stuff and all those things, but I couldn't be less entrepreneur business motivated. I really look at everything like, one, I love to talk about working out all day long, the same as I always have. So some of it's my hobby. I enjoy it. But from like a business standpoint, as long as I'm feeding the family and taking care of them, that's really my goals. I'm not one of those people. It's like, oh, I've got to do this with my business. This is my business, this. And, but again, it's a balance of, again, I don't want to just be useless with business and neglect stuff that's obviously will, bring more value, or obviously for what my content is worth. But so there's two things. One, not that important. The other one, kind of important. But I think most people, I think people get a feel from that with me on social media. I try and be, I don't know what the hell transparent means. I just post whatever I feel like posting, and sometimes I post about my family. So
yeah, interesting. I had no idea about the golf thing. I'll say that. I knew family was important from following you for a few years, but I didn't know the golf thing. So that's definitely your meat. So final question: if I've got access to anyone in the world, who should I interview next?
Oh, good question. Anyone in the world? I'm gonna pick.
I was going to say, by the way, Tom Purvis was the guy gave me your name. He's the guy that.
Yeah, you told me that. That's great. That means a lot to me. So if you could get, I don't know if you've had Jordan Peters on yet. For some reason, he's the first guy that popped in my brain as far as someone that I have a lot of respect for, as a great coach. Obviously a guy that's turned his passion. I like this fact because he's even more of a bodybuilder meathead than I am. I'm like, he's bodybuilder through and through and through. And it's such a small, he's a competitive bodybuilder, right? Obviously. And his niche is competitive bodybuilding. Yeah. He's got even a smaller niche than I do. And he's done such a good job at turning his passion into a business. He's definitely more of like turning into more of an entrepreneur person than I am. So he's always someone I always, from the first times that I met him, just enjoyed chatting with about meathead stuff, working out, all that. But I get on with him well anytime I talk now about anything even business related or training related or whatever. So he's the first person that popped in my brain. There's a whole lot of people like that, but since he was the first, then there you go. Try and get him on there.
Jordan's a great shout. I think I had Mark Coles on before, and I think he was one of the people that was recommended. So I'll have to chase Jordan up, try and get him on. Joe, thanks so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you. Please take a moment to let everyone know where they can find out more about you and what you do and get involved in your world.
Sure. Yeah. My main social media platform is Instagram now. So, if there's something you actually want to look for consistent content, where you could like dip your toes in, see if you're into it at all, I'd go check that out, because I post there consistently. And then from there, you can find all the rest of my stuff. I'm actually one of my goals this year is to be more consistent with YouTube, which I have been so far. So I actually have a lot more information going consistently on YouTube now. So if you watch my Instagram and the couple minutes of stuff is interesting, go to YouTube, because I've got, longer versions of stuff there. And then ultimately, if you're really into my stuff, I have an app. And basically my app is, it's geared a lot more towards training now than it used to be. So meaning now if you actually want a program to follow that's structured, it's my business partner, again, it's beautiful within the app as far as how you can actually follow workouts, track your workouts, log your workouts, exercise library right in there with actually in the programs as well too. So again, it's for actual making good training decisions and stuff. That's pretty much the goal of it as well too. But on that app also is just a massive amount, like, 5 years worth of educational, like literally thousands of hours of educational content that we've all condensed into a little TV section on there. So literally I have so much information on that app. It's over the top, to the point where ultimately one of my goals probably this year is actually turning, the app, making that just strictly more towards working out. and actually starting kind of a separate, purely educational platform geared a little bit more specifically towards trainers, honestly. So that's something coming in the future. But for right now, that's the majority of my world. Lots of great free content if you just want to go look and read and listen to some stuff. And then if you're interested in a little bit stuff deeper, that the app, again, aside from having some great programs, great workouts, things to follow, it's down the rabbit hole for as much content about muscle nerd stuff you could ever want to follow. So
excellent. All right, well, guys, definitely check that out. Joe's Instagram is amazing in terms of like free content, educational resource. If you're an enthusiast or a coach yourself, get stuck in. There's loads on there. Joe, thanks so much for taking the time. It's been brilliant chatting.
Yep, thanks for having me.
That wraps up today's episode. Thank you so much for investing your time with us. We really appreciate it. If you enjoyed what you heard and took value from it, please do me a favour by heading to iTunes right now, subscribing to the show, and leaving a review. Positive reviews, like 5 stars, hint, hint, really help the ranking of the show and will help us to spread the word and keep getting top-class guests on. Make sure to follow Breaking Muscle on social media and me at Tom McCormick, that's TOMMACCORMICK on Instagram. Bye for now, and I'm looking forward to catching you on the next episode of the Breaking Muscle podcast.